Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, we're actually going to start on time because
Speak loud.
we're going to start on time because everybody really got here in good, timely fashion. So I just want to thank Eddie Hughes for playing this beautiful and so I'm Meredith, and I want to welcome everybody along with Miriam and Andrew in the back, who are also part of the Peace and Social Justice Forum of Waldo County. Tonight, we are collaborating with the Possibility Alliance and the All Belfast Climate Dialogue ABCD program of the Belfast Free Library. We acknowledge we are on unceded lands of the Wabanaki, the Penobscot, Passamaquoddy, Mi'kmaq, and Maliseet peoples who stewarded this land and called it home long thousands of years before Europeans arrived. We also recognize what has happened, been endured, and been survived on this land by the indigenous people, and express gratitude for their leadership in the protecting the land of waters as they continue their struggle with the state of Maine to recognize their inherent sovereignty. We also want to express our respect and gratitude for the leadership and courage of indigenous peoples worldwide who are on the front lines of the struggle to protect our waters and Mother Earth in this time of devastating climate crisis. If we care about the climate and the natural world around us, we have to care about indigenous rights. I must say something about what's happening here in Maine. If anyone was at the State House recently in Augusta when the Wabanaki Alliance almost succeeded in overturning the governor's veto of LD 2004, you heard the Republican spokesman standing against the bill that would simply allow the tribes of Maine to access the federal programs and rights that all 157 other federally recognized tribes have, make the interconnectedness of tribal sovereignty and the climate crisis himself. He actually said in the most public way possible that if LD 2004 was passed, that the tribes could demand adherence of the state to the Clean Water Act of 1972 and the Clean Air Act of 1977. And that Maine, quote, can't afford that. So we must be vigilant when LD 2007 comes up in the next legislative session. I just need to share that. LD 2007, pay attention, check it out. Okay. We are here, the Peace and Justice Social Justice Forum is here almost every third Wednesday of the month to share and collaborate on films and events concerning peace and justice for all beings. The library has allowed us to use this space for over 20 years, and we're very grateful. And grateful to the library, who has been a community center since 1887.
Yes.
And all libraries, you got to get that in, and librarians who hold a place for the commons and for truth telling in our nation. Linda Harrington, who's busy Zooming this program, is one of the principal organizers of the ABCD program, and they have held over 35 programs and events over the past 3 years, both on Zoom and in person, on local response and engaging the broader community in discussions on the climate crisis here in Belfast. check out their website. They have got amazing resources and lists of past programs, all of which are really critical and interesting. Their developing goal is not to just encourage talk, but they've really moved toward inspiring people to act. A quote from that webpage that I really felt is, quote, "Working together is the best antidote we found to feeling overwhelmed." So we're here. And that's what we're doing tonight, working together. Great, lovely gathering here. And a lot of folks online on Zoom as well. So Ethan Hughes of the Possibility Alliance, which is a community committed to living simply while working for a just world, still having fun, and living free of fossil fuels in a gift economy, committed to both personal and planetary sustainability and service to all our communities. The Possibility Alliance is really, well, in my view, leading the way around reparations in our area as well. There is a donation bucket in the back, and we'll all talk about where we're going to give that money to, which will be very good for if anyone wants to put something in that at the end. The central reason that we're here tonight is really friendship and common cause. Ethan and Peter are friends, and that's how Peter got here, really. Ethan and I are friends, and that's how we got here, really. And then Brenda and I are friends, and here we are. So it's like, that's what we're doing. And it's because of that friendship and common cause that I think it feels to me like there is a gathering around the world of all of us who are really, really concerned. So I'm going to now turn it over to Ethan, who's going to introduce Peter. And we're really glad, Dr. Peter Kalmus, to be here to speak to them.
Good evening, everybody. At the end of the show, there's also going to be some more harp music. So stay around for both beauty and social action and important information. Thanks to Brenda and the library that hosts such an incredible diversity of events. It's been an honor to be part of what they've been doing for so long. And a big round of applause to the Waldo County Peace and Justice. Another round for the Beltback Library. I get to introduce Peter, who we met 2016. Peter came to visit our project, which was formerly in Missouri, and Peter's been an inspiration because of the ways he's leaned into the climate emergency, both as a climate scientist for NASA and trying to get the science out there. Also reducing his carbon footprint by 90%, which is covered in the book back there, which Peter is happy to give anyone books and signed books. It's $11 to print the books, but if someone really wants a book and can't afford it, it will also be gifted. So if in the end you would like to see Peter and his family's life and their goal to live more sane in the climate emergency. And Peter is a Vipassana practitioner, so meditation practice, and also started Scientist Rebellion. So he's also doing direct action. He's been arrested a few times, and now NASA is saying if that keeps happening, you're going to lose your job. So I appreciate when often we have reformists and revolutionaries butting heads. There's like this different theory of change. We should just go to the State House. We shouldn't get arrested. We should just get arrested. We need it all. And what I love about Peter's life is that not only getting his PhD and really learning about the climate emergency, embracing both writing for The Guardian and New York Times and Yes Magazine, doing education, doing personal work, meditation, reducing his carbon footprint by 90% of the average American, writing books, getting arrested. Just to dip into all those places and see that they're all essential is very rare to see that happening. So I appreciate you so much for the breadth of experiments that you've done in your life. It's an honor to have you tonight.
You gotta turn it on.
Gotta turn it on.
Yeah. I appreciate it. You want her on, but-
Oh, can I,
No,
one
no.
quick suggestion is if you feel able-bodied and comfortable, you could sit in the front on the floor and free up some seats for other people who may need them. So if you do standing, you feel like you can do that, that would free up some seats. Thank you so much.
This one, it's not. All right. So yeah, it's so great to be here. I can feel the energy in this community, and that's a great feeling. I used to do book talks before COVID, when the book came out in 2017, and did a whole bunch of book talks. And it was super fun. And I only had one that had the same sort of feeling, this feeling of energy, which was up in Canada, actually, up in Vancouver. So yeah, thank you for coming. It's such an honor. I personally believe that public libraries like this are truly sacred places, and I don't say that lightly. We need these places to come together as a community. And yeah, so I didn't start Scientist Rebellion, but I helped organize and do spokespersoning for them, and doing risky action, and just trying to like get more scientists to do that kind of action. And I should say also that I don't speak for NASA. I'm speaking on my own behalf tonight. And there is definitely some tension between being a NASA climate scientist and the responsibilities that come with that. And then, you know, first being a real, like, just very strong advocate with my words. And then when that wasn't having the effect that I wanted, actually starting to do nonviolent climate disobedience, which the first one I did was on April 6th of last year in Los Angeles before I moved to Chapel Hill. And so that was with Scientist Rebellion, and we had 3 other riskers that day, so there were 4 of us risking. And we were really angry that banks, these ultra-rich institutions, are contributing to the overheating, the irreversible overheating of planet Earth by providing the funding for new fossil fuel projects, as if the current fossil fuel projects aren't bad enough. We're still, our society, and this is multiple countries, not just the US, but the US is among the worst. And still just building new pipelines and starting new drilling and fracking for gas and drilling for oil, and up in the Arctic and off the coasts of the US and on federal lands, directly breaking, President Biden directly breaking his campaign promise, and pivoting away from any type of a climate presidency to a fossil fuel presidency, and just trying to expand as quickly as possible. So as a scientist, my hair is on fire. During the 2020 campaign, there was all this talk of listen to the scientists, right? And it turns out that's all that was, is talk, because the science couldn't be more clear. And you don't need scientists to tell you this. I mean, it's getting hot everywhere. It's getting hot in Europe and China, in the US, everywhere. And there's floods in Vermont, and there's floods everywhere. And there's, when you breathe that smoke from those wildfires, that's irritating and frustrating, and it makes me go a little bit insane. But that's the bodies of these beautiful trees that have basically turned into this toxic particulates in our air that go around the whole world, and then we breathe them in. But the forests are crying out. I was at a NASA team meeting a few weeks ago in Washington, DC, or near Washington, DC. And
Greenbelt.
what's that?
Greenbelt.
Oh, well, it was actually at the University of Maryland, but one of the senior scientists who was kind of mentor to me and who I respect tremendously, a voice that I respect as much as any scientists on the planet. He studies tropical forests, and he told me that he feels that the Amazon has already passed its tipping point and is on its way to being a savanna. And I haven't taken a poll of all of the tropical forest scientists, but the fact that he said that, I give tremendous weight to that, because he doesn't use words lightly. And that hit me like a gut punch because I can't believe this is happening on our watch. And I can't believe that we're not joining together as a loving tribe of humans globally to stop it. It looks like we're on the path towards literally just letting this get worse and worse and worse until everything collapses. And that's unacceptable to me. And I've got 2 sons, and I will fight as hard as I can to the very end. And I know that you will too. And I think we all feel that when we're fighting alongside each other, no matter how bad things get, it feels way better than not fighting. And that's enough reason to do it. So we can be outcome based, and we should be outcome based, but at the same time, we should always be cognizant of the community and of the relationships that we have and how we're feeling too. And I will tell you that to sit in despair and to not be connected with the community and to not be fighting is the worst thing that you can do. It's just far, far better to keep fighting and to try to recruit as many people into the fight as possible. And Ethan kind of touched on this a little bit, and it's super important, but a community, a healthy community in ecology, it's not a monoculture. There's not just one species. It's not like one species of pine. It's not one species of corn in a field. Like actual productive grasslands and forests and coral reefs have thousands of species that are working together and fulfilling different roles. And so as a community of activists, that's exactly how we have to be too. So there's definitely a place for the risky actions. I like the risky actions. I'll tell you a little bit why. On April 6th, when we were protesting JP Morgan Chase Bank, which again, they're the worst of all the banks. They fund more new fossil fuel projects than any other bank on the planet, but there's many other banks that are trying to unseat them. Like they're literally falling over themselves to fund new fossil fuel projects because projects is all they care about are profits. All they care about is the next quarter, which I believe is the type of insanity. Like I think this capitalist society is literally mad that we're willing to irreversibly destroy this spaceship that gives us all life, that we all depend on, that young people depend on, that future generations depend on, that all of these millions and millions of other beautiful innocent species on this planet depend on, to destroy that irreversibly for next quarter's profits, or to make an already grotesquely large bank account even larger, that is truly the banality of evil right there. And we have to come together, and we literally have to take the power away from them. Because in my view, they're sociopaths, and they've made it clear that they're not going to stop. And it's weird to be a NASA scientist, right, and to be talking about this, but all the evidence is right out there for anyone to see, right? In 2021, there were 4 fossil fuel CEOs from Shell, Exxon, Chevron, and what was the last one? I don't remember. To me, they're all equally bad, but there were 4 fossil fuel CEOs. They were testifying in front of Congress, and they were being asked questions by representatives like, you guys fund the American Petroleum Institute, you put out disinformation, you lobby to block action. Will you stop doing this? Will you stop lying? Will you stop trying to make climate change worse? Do you know what these 4 CEOs did? Did they say, yes, we promised to do that? Of course not. They started blathering and doing legalese speak. And the congressional representative stopped them and said, you're filibustering. I will take that as a no. So they literally said, legally speaking, they said no, that they would not stop their lying that they've been doing for decades and colluding to take this planet to ever hotter levels, which means ever more heat waves and floods and wildfires and sea level rise and crop failures and ecosystem losses and changes in ocean and atmospheric circulations that, frankly, we climate scientists don't have a great understanding of yet. There's stuff coming that we don't understand. So anyway, I know I'm kind of weaving a lot of different threads together here, but to go back to the types of the roles in climate action. So on April 6th, when I got arrested for the first time, I was so scared. I thought there's probably a 50-50 chance I'm getting fired from this job that I love. Because I was like a space geek when I was a kid. I loved planets and stars and spaceships and science fiction. And so for me to work at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, where they make the Mars rovers and they make all these amazing satellites and they send missions to freaking Saturn, it's just like a dream to be there doing climate science. So yeah, I thought like there's a 50-50 chance I'm getting fired for doing this. But as soon as I walked up to that door of the van and chained it shut and then chained my wrist to that handle with my 3 brothers, and we stood there in solidarity and waited with determination for the police to take us away. And they spent about 100 police in full riot gear in Los Angeles, and the video went absolutely viral. A few days after I got out of jail, I had to do something with my phone account, and I was talking to somebody at a call center in the Philippines, and she was like, "Oh, you're that scientist that got arrested in Los Angeles." And like, yeah, and she's like, a lot of people in the Philippines are talking about that. So when I changed on though, and I know Ethan probably knows what I'm talking about too. That first time, the feeling of it was like the endorphins, the rush, the feeling of being on the right side of history, the feeling of solidarity with frontline activists and people that have given so much more in this fight. The feeling of overcoming my own cowardice to do that and to take that stand, it just felt so right. I cannot tell you how right it felt. And so part of why I advocate people to take those riskier actions is because you will feel so good. And I have a feeling that maybe when we get to the Q&A, other people who've been arrested for being on the right side of history could probably share a little bit, and I think that's a pretty common experience. So yeah, I want everyone to have it, but there's a ton of different roles. For every risky action, there's lots of roles just to support that action, and then there's thousands of other roles in the movement that don't have anything to do with climate disobedience that are necessary too, like, for example, being a climate scientist, right? That's just one. But what I think we are, so I touched a little bit on what an emergency plan, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. But I will say at this point, like we should be, if as much as we can, we should be making stopping global heating and saving what can still be saved our highest priority, whatever that means for you. So if that means taking a stand at work, which is risky, right? Like you could piss off your colleagues if you kind of make noise, whatever your job is, whatever your institution is, going to city council meetings, I don't know if you're a writer, if you're an artist, if you're a musician, whatever you do, there's a niche for you that only you can fill in this movement because we're all so unique. And I would say that if there's anything, I often get asked, like, what can I do? I can't really answer that because, again, it's just so unique to the person. But I would say that there's 2 sort of universals that kind of spring directly to my mind. One is you've got to do stuff with other people. You can't just act alone. There's some things that kind of feel like acting alone, like maybe writing a book or something, but that's a community thing too. Anyone who's written a book will kind of know what I'm talking about. And then you do talks like this too. So I really think it's always going to be with other people. And then the second universal, I think, for all kind of useful climate activism is it's going to feel kind of risky. So I think we're at a point where we sort of have to take risks, because if you think about how we work as like highly social mammals, apes basically, right? We are members of the ape family. We're so tuned in to everyone else in the community and what they're thinking about us, and that energy between people, and whether we're about to get canceled or whether people are listening to us or ignoring us. So when you want to move social norms, when you want to shift things, when you want to say like private jets aren't okay, fossil fuel CEOs making billions of dollars and the industry making over $1 trillion a year, that's not okay anymore. Universities refusing to divest is not okay anymore. All of this stuff that's happening in our society, the expansion of the fossil fuel industry, maybe even the commercial aviation system itself, right? Which a lot of us still partake in. But you can still push against that and say, yeah, like I'm going to fly in it, as long as it's there, but please, let's all work together to take that away because we're in a climate emergency. So we need policies to start wrapping that down. But when you say these things that aren't kind of socially accepted yet, when people are still posting Instagram reels of the vacations they take, and that makes them like more popular, right? You're pushing against social norms, but you have to push against them to change them. But it's always risky, kind of by definition. That's what I'm getting at, is that we need very rapid social norm shifting right now. You've probably heard of the ski slope graph. The longer every single day that we allow the fossil fuel industry to exist, every minute brings us deeper into irreversible climate emergency. And I want to also say a little bit what I mean by irreversible. So carbon dioxide does not come back out of the atmosphere easily. So if you burn any fossil fuel, a little piece of coal to generate electricity, or a gallon of gas in a car, or a ton of kerosene in an airplane, or a therm of natural gas to heat a home, whatever it is, any tiny little bit of fossil fuel that gets burned combusts into carbon dioxide, carbon with 2 oxygens, which has a vibrational mode that interacts with outgoing infrared radiation. So the two main ways that the Earth is exchanging energy with its environment, which is space. So it's not through conduction, right? Because it's not touching anything, it's through radiation. So the two main ways that the Earth is interacting energetically is with sunlight coming in. If that was the only thing, the Earth would get hotter and hotter and everything would melt and we'd all die. But there's a second thing, which is infrared radiation going out. And when the energy coming in is equal to the energy going out, the Earth stays at the same temperature. And that's what we've had for the last 10,000 plus years. And that's what's allowed civilization to flourish. That's what all of the species on planet Earth are adapted to right now. And when that carbon dioxide from burning fossil fuel goes up there, it blocks some of that outgoing infrared radiation because it's vibrating at the same wavelength as sort of some of the highest, most powerful parts of that outgoing. So all black bodies, every object, like this object, our bodies, a planet, a star, every object physically emits what's called black body radiation, and the Earth is the same, and that's the outgoing infrared radiation. So what's happening is that's getting blocked, some of it's getting reflected back down. So that's why the Earth is heating up. And it has to heat up so that the same amount ultimately of infrared radiation can go back out to space and balance that sunlight. But because it's got this thicker blanket, it's got to be hotter. But the surface of our planet has to be hotter to get the same amount of energy out into space. So it'll go back into energy balance, but at a hotter temperature. And that's what global heating is. And that's what's driving all of this craziness that we're living through now. And that's why so many of us became climate activists a long time ago, because we were hoping that we could get global society to actually be proactive. And now people are finally starting to wake up because the catastrophes are getting so bad, which means in a way, we failed. But like I said earlier, it's never too late to fight. That's a truism because the Earth is this great, big, complicated living system. And even if we lose the Amazon rainforest, there's other things that are worth saving. And we have to keep fighting to prevent that heat we want to keep that heat at the lowest possible level, right? So, gosh, I got so many threads now. I feel like I gotta remember the callbacks, and I'm probably not gonna remember the callbacks. But how are we doing on time, you think? Oh yeah, we're at about 25 minutes. So actually, maybe I've said a lot, and there's still a ton more to say. But this is I am going to be here for about a month. I'm super excited to be here. I will say that I've been busy raising 2 amazing sons, and I've been really busy being a climate scientist at NASA, which is not easy, and trying to do a little bit of writing on the side. And the thing that I've been missing over those years is like a real sense of community. Like I've been living what I would call a fairly standard middle class American life, where it just you have friends and stuff, but it's not like it's not this rich thing that I think a lot of earlier generations maybe had in terms of just kind of lots and lots of interaction. It's much more, to me, my life and my friends have felt a lot more curated, and I'm hungry for more community. So I'm kind of wondering what's coming next for me and for my family, now that my sons are, one of my sons is a senior in high school, and then my other son Zane, who's here tonight, who's like a sophomore in high school. So yeah, like 3 years there, we're going to be empty nesters, and so I came here to basically learn from you guys, and to learn what kind of what's going on in Belfast and how you guys are building community and community resilience. To make a quick, the title of the talk was supposed to be Community Resilience in a Climate Emergency, so I haven't touched on that much yet. But so that you don't feel like you got shortchanged, you came to hear about community resilience, and we can get into that in the Q&A a lot. But to me, there's 3 super important things that I'm looking for. 2 of them are really nuts and bolts. So a lot of community resilience and community sufficiency in terms of food, instead of like getting food from these super long corporate supply chains. The same thing with energy. So being able to produce, the community should be able to produce most or all of its energy that it's using. And then art. So the community should have a vibrant art scene, music scene, which is, it's not, I think for humans, art is not a nice to have, it's absolutely essential. You know, in a way, I don't know if life's really worth living if we don't have art. So yeah, I think I've been talking to Ethan over the years, and you know, he did a lot of the homework for me by looking all around the US and carefully selecting Belfast, and he's told me great things about what's happening here. So yeah, I came to learn from you guys over the next month, and I just got here today, and I'm super excited. So with that, maybe Ethan, should we do a little bit of a interactive section, and then we'll do that for a bit, and then we'll have maybe a little bit of music, and then a little bit of Q&A. That sound good? Okay. So why don't we just like pass this around?
So Peter asked me to do the second session in kind of an interview, knowing his story, what he might have not shared, that I'm guessing what will be interesting to you. So, but you'll get your chance to have questions too. We'll have at least a half hour for questions and answers. And we'll have some more music from Zane and Etta. So first question, thanks for what you've shared already. How is academia blocking or blunting important info? Getting out.
Yeah, it's like a lightning round question. Well, so
We'll make sure NASA is blocked from getting that.
So there's so Naomi Oreskes had a paper a few years ago that she titled, I think it was something like "Erring on the Side of Least Drama," and that's a real thing in science. So I started out as an astrophysicist. My PhD is in physics. And for 8 years, I was a gravitational wave astrophysicist, and I got more and more freaked out every year by climate change until I had a chance to shift. I got my PhD in 2008, and I could have shifted into climate science then, but I wasn't kind of ready. And I was like kind of a big shot in gravitational wave science. I'm like, I can't give that up yet. But I kind of regret that. But then 4 years later, it just got so bad that I couldn't wait anymore, and I switched, got a postdoc in earth science. And while I was an astrophysicist, I was like I would go to conferences. I was still flying back then, and like I'd send an email to the whole collaboration and be like, anyone who wants to talk about climate stuff, like meet me at a certain table at the lunch, you know, that we were having. And that even just sending that email to the whole, like all 800 gravitational wave scientists in the collaboration felt really scary to me at the time. So that's kind of what I mean about taking risks. Yeah, there were a few people that wanted to talk about it, but mostly that collaboration was oblivious. Like they were looking for gravitational waves. They had, you know, so they had their hands full. They weren't thinking about climate change pretty much at all. And then when I shifted into earth science, I was super surprised because, you know, scientists, we have these talks. Typically, it's like a 45-minute talk plus about 10 minutes for questions. And the talks are about like the great ice sheets of our planet melting away and how exactly that's happening, or what's happening in the Amazon rainforest, or what's happening to ocean circulations. And it's all like things are changing super fast and it's like, here's where it's going, and it's like really bad. And then like I'm like sitting there like freaking out but I'm like a little junior postdoc. So I'm kind of taking my social cues from everyone, and they're just like, did you do like this particular kind of data filtering? Like, how did you handle this issue with that satellite? No one's saying like, guys, this is really bad. We have to do something. Like what about our kids? You know, like no one's saying that, and no one's talking about the grief that they're feeling. So I felt really alienated and I was really surprised by that, becoming an earth scientist. But yeah, I think there's this fear among both scientists and journalists, and it might be even worse with journalists. They're afraid that they work so hard to get to that point. Sorry for the popping.
You have it too close to your mouth.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. They work so hard to get to that point in their careers that they they're afraid to lose to lose like the kind of respect of their peers by appearing unobjective, right? And I feel like that's a kind of denial actually, because what I found in my own life is that it's pretty hard to take real action unless you've like kind of fully embraced it's grief is a kind of, it feels sort of unpleasant at first. Anxiety feels super unpleasant, and we can talk about the emotions. Anxiety, I think, is not helpful to me, but grief is really helpful to me, and I lean into it. I don't try to repress grief, but I think a lot of people still are. And then if you're repressing the grief about what's happening on Earth right now, you haven't fully accepted that it's happening. And then I think you do get scientists. Like basically it's right now I've been talking to Adam McKay because there's some scientists that we know were very prominent who are basically saying, stay calm, everyone, like don't freak out, like the planet's getting warmer, but President Biden's got this or whatever. And I'm like, no, you guys should be freaking out. Like this is so bad. Like we are risking losing everything here. And I don't think I made this clear enough. That's one of the threads. I started to talk about irreversibility, right? So it's like, it's a ratchet, right? When we release the CO2, effectively never goes away. Like it will go away a long time from now, long after we're not around anymore. But I'm like, timescales that civilization really cares about. This heat, like how hot it gets is how hot it's going to stay for a really long time. You can't just, it's not like cleaning plastic trash out of a park. You can't just go back. People talk about carbon capture, but I think that's vaporware that people are using to distract and to allow, like the fossil fuel industry loves talking about carbon capture. We don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
It would be massively expensive if we did try to do it. We'd be there's a huge like mind-boggling moral sort of problem, which is that we'd be basically asking our kids to clean up our mess to the tune of, I don't know, the scale would be bigger than the whole fossil fuel industry right now. And we don't even know if we could do it. So basically, they're going to be dealing with all of these catastrophes, and crop failures. They're not going to have extra, like 10% of their economy or whatever to spend on pulling carbon out of the atmosphere. So it's just, it's basically irreversible, and it's a trend, right? So that's why I can say with complete confidence that everything that we're experiencing this summer is on average going to be worse next summer, worse the next summer, worse the next summer after that. And you just let your imagination go a little bit, and until it gets so bad that you're like, why isn't everyone standing on the roofs and screaming? Like, why aren't we storming the White House, right? So yeah, I do think we should be freaking out. I think there is a value to panic. Maybe there's a value to fear. Panic is like kind of chaotic fear, but fear is something that allows us to move out of danger, right? If we were in danger, if we're standing on a railroad track and there was a train coming and we had no fear, I mean, it's maybe not a good example because, but fear is something that's there to protect us. And if you're like a famous scientist that everyone respects, and you're saying, don't be afraid, stay calm. what does that do to society's response to the climate emergency? So these scientists, they think they've been climate activists for years, a lot of them. They come from an earlier time when the crisis wasn't as bad. But I believe they are doing incredible damage right now to our responses as society, and they don't even know it. They still think they basically believe that society will respond more if people will respond more if they're not too afraid. So they're like, sugarcoat it, don't scare them too much. And I think that's just like so wrongheaded. But besides, they're not sociologists. Like they're like now standing outside of their area of expertise. They're being incredibly unscientific on two counts, right? They're speaking outside of their area of expertise and acting like they know that the best way to get a society to respond is to not scare people too much. That may or may not be true. And second, they're acting like they know more than they know. So I don't think the North Atlantic sea surface temperatures, the ice melt in Antarctica that we've been seeing over the last 6 weeks or so, even the heat dome in the Pacific Northwest, this was not stuff that our climate models predicted. I think we are entering into sort of a regime that I certainly don't understand it that well. I mean, I can say that my own areas of expertise are using climate models to kind of project how increasing temperature is going to impact ecosystems and humans. So I study like projections of extreme humidity, for example. So I don't really understand the heat dome at a deep level, for example, but I do have a clear sense that the community as a whole, the scientific community, does not know very well, cannot predict exactly how things are going to unfold. Like the models have been pretty good in terms of like when we will get a 1.2 degrees Celsius or 1.3 degrees Celsius of global average temperature. They're pretty good at that, but they don't really predict heat domes, and they don't predict some of the crazy stuff that's happening right now on planet Earth.
And I want to thank you. I know Peter did a lot of grief work and even shared tears at public talks in his book. And there's a lot of deep information coming right now. I just want to invite you to take a moment, turn to someone you're with in the audience and just share what's coming up for you. Just to process some of this, because if we just take it intellectually and not here. Yeah, so just turn to someone and just share what's happening in your heart and mind right now. Just a moment. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing. This is part of what we're hoping to do with having Peter here is this isn't a one-off event. You may have read in the paper, but we're having follow-up circles about how do we come together, how do we respond, how do we do practical actions. Just to remind you, they'll be at the Possibility Alliance at 85 Edgecombe Road this Sunday, the 23rd from 4 to 6, and August 5th, Saturday from 4 to 6. And this would be people coming together. There's some already great groups, some back in the back table there.
Schedule of those events?
It's in the, it was in the
In the
Republican
email.
Journal.
And it's also in the email that you got if you.
I don't have a computer.
Come up and see me after and I'll give you the location and time.
Okay.
So just to know, like we're starting, there's already great work happening in the community. We're taking advantage of Peter being here to just continue coming together to take action. So the next question for Peter is, this is a challenging one for all of us, but how did you make the switch? So many of us believe we're in an emergency, but we're still flying on vacations, consuming goods from around the world, going out to rest, doing all these things, which it's all based on fossil fuels. So it's a big jump because we're both addicted. They also have a lot of meaning to go on trips with family and things. How do we make the switch? How do we start shifting? And the important question too is the bystander effect. If we don't see someone next to you acting in a certain way, you don't actually take in the emergency. What would happen if everyone in Belfast said, oh, you're flying on vacation, maybe you should just go to Camden Hill State Park? Like what would start happening with the bystander effect, which really affects human culture? So those two questions.
Yeah, that's a hard question. So, I don't breathe into it, basically. So yeah, I kind of follow a middle path, because you actually when I was working on my book, which came out a long time ago in 2017, and a lot of my thinking has changed since then. But it also has some good climate science in there. But I felt a little bad that I only kind of reduced my emissions by like 90%. I'm like, oh, maybe I can't like publish a book until I go further. And then I realized like, well, actually it's probably better to publish it now because like everything I've done seemed pretty reasonable to me and like not that hard for other people to do. And like actually the middle path thing was maybe like an advantage and like something that was a good thing to talk about. So for me, like I think the reason I haven't been on a plane since 2012. I've never taken a pledge to not get on a plane, but the last flight I took, I kind of freaked out a little bit when they shut the doors, and I thought seriously about like getting up and like making a big scene and asking to be let off the plane because I felt like I was doing it for my career as an astrophysicist, and I felt like I was robbing, basically stealing from my kids, and it felt really just gross to me. And I would get on a plane if I thought it was something that was selfless enough and would have a important enough impact on stopping this catastrophe that it was worthwhile. Nothing like that has come up since 2012. When I was in LA, I was like, if Congress ever wants me to come testify, and I have to be there like the next day, so I can't take a train, and I probably get on the plane for that, but I think I'd probably burn that bridge by getting arrested and stuff. So yeah, so again, like that's we were talking a little bit about that kind of like insider advocate versus the like external really pushing and bringing the heat, and they are both important, right? But I've definitely kind of like chosen like external pushing because I'm just freaking out so much, so like it's more a natural fit for me. But the other thing I wanted to say is there's some so-called individual actions that like they're fine to do, but don't pretend that they're helping, like recycling. It's not recycling your stuff is fine, but it's not going to stop global heating. Global heating is 85% from the fossil fuel industry and maybe 80% from the fossil fuel industry and maybe 15% from the animal agriculture industry, plus or minus like 5%. So those two industries, we've got to basically end them. And a lot of people don't talk about industrial animal agriculture, but that 15% maybe doesn't sound like much, but like if we had a cultural shift that like we shifted society to emergency mode and everyone prioritized having keeping Spaceship Earth's life support working for us, I think we could stop animal agriculture, relatively speaking, overnight compared to fossil fuels, because you can't just turn off fossil fuels overnight because people will freeze to death, and fossil fuels are part of our corporate agriculture system. So some of the stuff that we use fossil fuels from will take longer to get away from. But anyway, yeah. So again, I just have this habit of like giving really long answers. What was the second part of the question? Did I get everything?
Just what your thoughts are about the bystander principle, studying a lot of that is we don't see people acting differently. We don't respond like they do the experiments where there's smoke in the theater and nobody gets up. And then, but as soon as one person gets up, everyone responds.
Yeah, I think it's a real thing. And I do think that dynamic is absolutely going on right now globally. So I've used the phrase global bystander effect in like articles and stuff. Then I was writing a book chapter for this book on like climate psychology aimed at like actual therapists, like how they can, like I believe that activists and climate scientists should be seeing therapists because we are a mess, we're a hot mess. And like a lot of activists kind of like, there's a lot of ego there and there's a lot of conflict. And I think the active movement would be healthier if we had good therapists. But they have to be therapists that actually know we're in a climate emergency, which is like, you don't want to get gaslit by your therapist, right? Basically. But anyway, I mentioned this global bystander effect. I think it's a thing. I think like scientists, again, like acting, like we can say all the numbers and we can show all the graphs, but if we sound calm and if we're not like freaking out and we're not saying like, this is code red, you guys, like do everything you can, storm the castle because that's how bad this is. Like literally, I personally believe at this point, billions of lives are at risk. Maybe more because there's 8 billion humans right now. And I feel like I don't think anyone has a very deep understanding of these incredibly complex systems that keep those 8 billion people alive, right? The food systems, the water systems, the geopolitical infrastructure, insurance, economy, real estate, all of this stuff is so like deeply interlinked, right? And this force, like I said, every single day, we've got more of these CO2 molecules, things getting a little hotter. It's a force that keeps getting stronger every day, pushing against these systems that were not designed to withstand that pressure. So I don't know exactly how it's going to go down or when it's going to go down, but at some point that stuff has to break because it's just physics. Like this is the thing. I want to scream sometimes because it seems like even Biden doesn't get this and the public doesn't seem to get this. It's basic physics. You burn that fossil fuel and as sure as the sun will rise tomorrow morning, the planet will get hotter. It's not something that takes any fancy models to say that, right? So anyway.
One last question, and then we're going to have a wonderful song, violin from Peter's son, Zane, and just to have a moment to just have music and be with our nervous system. But that's the question I wanted to ask is with all of this, how do we move forward without shame, without just participating, but to actually work through the shame and grief so that we can actually be part of what you're talking about, the beloved community, that quote that the next best thing to freedom and liberation is to fight for freedom and liberation.
Yeah, it's such great questions. I wish we could just do like 100 of Ethan's questions. Shame should not be a part of any of this. There was a book that came out after mine. I had a title something like "We're All Climate Hypocrites Now" or something like that. And at first I kind of balked, but now I'm like, that's brilliant. That's a brilliant title because it's except maybe for Ethan and Sarah and Etta and Isla, but even you guys use like a little bit of fossil fuels. Like you still have to buy inner tubes for your bikes and stuff. So I mean, you can't step completely outside of this system while the system is as it is. Like I don't know a single person who is growing 100% of their food, right? It's just very, very hard to do, which is again why we need community resilience, because as a community, we can actually start to get to those goals that we can't do on our own. Like the preppers, that whole prepping thing is just, it's another kind of insanity. And it's in a way very sad because they feel like they want to wall themselves off from community in a way, and they don't even realize that all of the bullets and beans that's like basically condensed community in the form of bullets and beans, right? Because they didn't make it themselves, it came from these like supply chains and whatnot. But anyway, maybe the best reason to do things like try to fly a little bit less and try to kind of walk the talk. You're not going to stop global heating by doing that, but at least it might make you have less shame. And if you can't do that, don't have any shame. Just be like, you know, I keep saying like, I've been pushing for stopping commercial aviation for a long time, but I'm actually not the most powerful advocate for that because I haven't flown since 2012. So I'm like easy to kind of sideline. People are like, oh, he's kind of crazy. He hasn't flown since 2012. If people that still fly start to say, like, if you guys that still fly have the courage to be like, yeah, I still fly, we have to end commercial aviation. Feel free to call me a hypocrite. I don't care. This is a freaking emergency. I wish I was like these guys who don't fly, but I'm not there yet for this reason or that reason. I'm trying to fly less, but I'm still flying. But come on, let's have policies. We shouldn't have frequent flyer programs. We should ban private jets. We should start making, you know, like having graded ticket prices for the more miles you fly per year. We should maybe nationalize these industries like the oil, like the fossil fuel industry, the aviation industry, these things which are in some way public goods that we're sort of stealing from future generations, and that we know we need to ramp down, and we have to do it in kind of an equitable way. So we shouldn't let, you know, airline and fossil fuel CEOs awaken record profits while the planet's burning around us, right? So being an advocate, even while you're still using this stuff, and letting like the people on the far right call you names and just be like, all right, yeah, you're right. Sure, I'm a hypocrite, but the planet's on fire and we have to end commercial aviation, right? So I think that would be a very powerful form of advocacy, and I haven't seen anyone do that. As far as grief goes, I mean, grief is, I think grief is basically love in a disguise. And you shouldn't be afraid of that. You're feeling loss because of things that you love. And I don't know how grief works for you, but for me, it's not debilitating at all. I find it very, in a way, very inspirational and very connecting with other people. Like if you don't hide your grief and you let it kind of peek out, I think it's very connecting. And it's very, I think, kind of cathartic for me. And again, I think it starts to shatter through those layers of denial that we have both in our individual brains and in the larger society. So I would say, don't be afraid of it. For me, again, it kind of comes like, you know, when it's a sunny day with cloud and the cloud kind of comes and there's a shadow for a few seconds when the sun comes back. It's sort of like that. It doesn't last too long for me. And it just makes me fight harder, right? So don't be afraid of grief.
Thank you. We're gonna just take a moment to have one violin piece to ground us, and then we're gonna open it up to questions from all of you. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Peter. Zane, come on up. What are you gonna play for us?
Violin Concerto number 1 in A major.
Do you want to say it on the mic?
Yeah, sure. Saisons, Violin Concerto number 1 in A major, but just the first movement.
And it has an orchestral accompaniment, which is beautiful, which you just have to imagine.
Yeah.
So this is also an imagination exercise. Yeah. Yeah, you don't often get to hear a violin concerto without the accompaniment. I think it's kind of cool, but yeah, if you have a computer, do yourself a favor and put in Sanson violin concerto
Yeah.
#1.
Thank you.
Oh, is it too loud?
Yeah, people were complaining on
Oh,
the Zoom. so
Okay, oh,
that's
and
good.
yeah, and it's really a great piece. Anyway, should we do Q&A?
Yeah.
Okay, so why don't we just just raise your hand and I'll do my best. Okay.
What can I do?
The climate activist. So
What about
personally in my everyday life?
Be a climate activist. So, I mean, yeah, you could fly less. So I go through a lot of that stuff in my book, and I really think that the biggest problem with my book is like I hadn't been arrested yet, and I didn't in 2017, 2016, 2015 and 16 when I was kind of finishing the book. I didn't really, there wasn't much of a climate movement back then, and I didn't know what to do. So I decided to kind of go into my personal emissions, but it's not going to solve the problem. It's just, it might make me feel it's fun, but you should always be a climate activist too, whatever that means for you. But you have to take risks. Reducing your own emissions is not a risk. It won't feel risky. It'll feel fun.
How about telling other people not to use plastic?
I mean, again, like it's the corporations making the plastics. That's the real problem. So we have to build up enough power as a movement. We have to be more powerful than those corporations to get them to stop. Okay, so that's where the activism comes in. Like you and a few other people, like using a bit less plastics. It's not bad, but it's not challenging the power. That's the problem, right? So we have to challenge the power, and that takes the two things I said, right? Joining together and taking risks. Yeah.
Yes, I just want to put a plug in for third act. I'm sure you
Love third act.
because we have, I think, a fairly robust beginning third act group in this town. And we've stood out in front of Bank of America. There's another standout Friday from 1 to 1:30. I can put a plug in.
Yeah.
We're going after the city to ask them to adopt the non-proliferation treaty. And I think Belfast really has a history of setting a trend around the invisible, indigenous people say. Belfast is one of the first, and it spread like wildfire, and so I'm hoping that advocating for the non-proliferation treaty will spread. And then the third act is to go after TD Bank. In this state, TD Bank has the most depositors of Mainers of any bank, and they're also the largest investor in fossil fuels. So it feels to me that third act, and there are a lot of things that I think I can do between.
And people of all ages can get involved with third act, right? Yeah.
And not, the whole range, I'm just gonna say, between waking up to being, knowing the climate reality and being arrested.
I think
All of
that's
those things are really, really important.
a great follow-on to the first question, and I should probably kind of repeat the questions a little bit. So the first question was basically, what can I do? And the second, I don't know, like.
So you have the mic too close to the thing that's supposed to be in your pocket.
Okay, oh, I didn't know it would hear because it's not like a speaker, but,
Yeah.
I should probably just clip it on my shirt.
And if you put the other thing in your pocket, it might
There.
behave.
Okay. So yeah, I don't really understand these things that well.
It's okay. You're
Oh, it
just,
sounds way better the way I'm using it as it's designed, huh? Okay. So yeah, the second question was kind of a comment on you know, one thing that's great to do right here in Belfast, which is get involved with third act. And I fully agree with that. I fully support the non-proliferation treaty and talked to the organizers of that many times. And third act is great. I have high hopes that third act is going to do exactly what I was talking about, and basically build an ecosystem with many different roles, including arrestable roles, but many non-arrestable roles. So yeah, so next question.
Love third act. Yes, please show up for that. And wondering for you, what's a direct action, direct climate resistance action coming up in the next year that you are excited to engage in?
Oh, that's a good question. So I've been working a lot with Climate Defiance since I'm only a few hours away from Washington, DC. And I hope that, so then, I don't know if you haven't heard of Climate Defiance, they have a really nice strategy, in my opinion, or a nice choice of tactic, which is they disrupt basically speeches and fundraisers from kind of like politicians who say like we should take climate change seriously, but who aren't actually taking climate change seriously, and in many cases are expanding fossil fuel interests. So they're really pointing a flaming finger at these hypocrites that do have positions of power, and making it so that they're in many cases scared to go out and give their talks and stuff. And so I think they are having a real impact. So I have, but I haven't, and another nice thing about the climate defiance actions is they're what we call yellow actions. So red means it's arrestable potentially. Green means you're sending with a sign. Yellow means it could get hairy, but it probably won't. So yeah, I'm looking forward to doing some actions with climate defiance because I think they're making a lot, they're having a lot of impacts with a relatively low amount of risk, which is great to see. So what I don't like seeing is and I probably get in trouble for saying this, but I'm not crazy to see activists sit in a roadway and block it and then get arrested and hardly anyone hears about it. And the few people that are there at the front, the people in their cars are yelling at them and not happy with them. Like, I don't really see that as a super useful action. So if you can make more waves and challenge power with like the minimal amount of risk, that's good. Let's see, yes.
I think one huge segment that needs to be reformed immediately is the defense industry in terms of climate, in terms of fossil fuel usage, is the biggest consumer of fossil fuels on the planet. And how do we stop that?
Well, a great question. I will kind of raise you. So this was about the US military, which is like by far the largest military on the planet. In my book, I talk a little bit about war tax resistance because I'm so angry about paying taxes that, you know, half of them get used to fund this gargantuan military, and it makes me really mad. Because I don't completely disagree with it. But what I will say in terms of raising the stakes is that the much, propagandized Inflation Reduction Act in terms of the biggest climate bill the US has ever passed, also the only climate bill the US has ever passed. So even if it was very small, it would still be the biggest one. In some ways, it is very small because the climate pieces to the IRA come out to roughly 6% of what we spend on the US military in a year. So that's how much right now the US government is willing to spend on having a habitable planet. 6% of what it spends on the military. So I would, to answer your question about how do we reduce the fossil fuel from the US military, I'd say we get our priorities straight and we spend more on having a habitable planet than on building bombs and airplanes and whatever. Yeah, there's a question. Yes.
We need to buy a new car. And because my husband has to drive to Augusta for his job. And should we buy an electric car? Is that a
I would say yes.
meaningful thing to do?
Yeah, so I would say yes and no. I would say, yeah, if you have to buy a car, buy an electric car because we just want to get the, like when Governor Newsom, so I was a Californian for 14 years, when Governor Newsom talks about things like, what is it, like not selling new gasoline cars by 2035? Again, that also makes my hair go on fire because it's so little, so late. We have so the reason I say yes or no is because I believe we have to move away from the system of private car ownership. But it's a great example of how it's a great example of how you can't do that if you're stuck in a system where to have a job and put food on the table, you need to have a freaking car. So it has to go hand in hand. So I do believe we have to get rid of the fossil fuel cars much more quickly. But at the same time, like I have an electric car, and it sort of bugs me that I still have to have. But again, I said like it's a middle path, and yeah, like I'm not proud of having an electric car, but I'd rather have that than a gas car.
Why are you not proud of having an electric?
Because it's a lot of stuff. It's a lot of fossil fuels to make the electric car, basically. It's still perpetuating car culture. It's still this giant thing that goes really fast and can kill bikers. It's still a vote against really good bike infrastructure and really walkable downtowns. So for all those reasons, I think the average car is used like 5% of the time or something. Like, I don't know the exact numbers, but 95% of the time, basically, it's just sitting there being unused. So we could probably have a 10th as many or 20th as many cars. The problem is they get used at the same time on rush hours, but we could still have way fewer if we didn't if they were more of a commons than they, like every individual, and then we could have better public transit. So it's easy to imagine a system that's better than having, 10 lanes of freeways spaghettiing all over the country and all that goes with that, right? In fact, like there's really remarkable photos, again, as an Angelino, a former Angelino, in the like mid-century, mid-20th century, Los Angeles was, right now it's famous for being the most car city in the United States, and but in the mid-century, it was famous kind of for having the best trolley system in the US. But I don't know exactly the politics involved. It should be probably should be an Adam McKay documentary or something, but there was a concerted effort. I think the auto industry played a big role to basically tear up the streetcars. And there's pictures of streetcars literally stacked like 6 or 7 tall in these yards, right? Because they just been ripped out like that. So yeah, you can imagine a better system. Next question, yes.
How do you kind of like resolve the tendency for people to spread a sense of ambiguity around the how critical the situation is, where people tend to say it's a naturally occurring cycle, or it's human oriented or not.
The standard climate denier talking points, how do I deal with them? Yeah, I don't really, because that's, so my dad talks to me a lot about this. So he's actually a Republican, and but he's one of the rare Republicans that thinks we are in a climate emergency and we really need to act fast on climate. So he's an interesting character, but he really like wants me to talk to Republicans and like talk to climate deniers. And I'm like, Dad, if somebody says 2 + 2 = 5, like there's limits to discourse. Like discourse can only happen in like a certain space. And if somebody says 2 + 2 = 5, and you like take like 2 sticks and like another set of 2 sticks, and you're like 1, 2, 3, 4, and they're like, no, that's a conspiracy, it's actually 5. Then you can't, you're just wasting your time at some point. So I tend to try to push the kind of moderates, and in a way, they're sort of the same moderates that maybe MLK was talking about in his letter from Birmingham jail. They're the ones that say stay calm. They're the ones that feel like electric cars is enough. I remember when I bought my electric car, there was a fire going in Santa Monica, and I had this sense like this is just so not enough, right? Like I want to push the people who get the science, but maybe haven't fully felt the grief and like haven't fully kind of owned how serious this is. I'm trying to get them to go there, because I think I'm better at that.
So what are some resources for the science?
Oh, good. It's a good question. There's a lot of them. I don't know. I mean, like I like looking at the IPCC summary reports, but they're pretty heavy going if you're not like a scientist. They're pretty heavy going for me too. But there's books that people have written about like like the bare bone basics of climate science, and I would look for one of those from like look at the reviews, make sure that you with a few minutes of Googling, you can sort of tell who the climate deniers are and who the anti-climate
What
deniers.
about the NASA website?
The NASA website's good.
That's good. There's
yeah.
a lot there.
There's a lot of stuff there. That's very true. I'm trying to get some of my results up on the NASA
Okay,
website.
but there is.
Okay, next question. Yes.
There's a lot of good arguments about why it's hard to do collective action, things like environment, people have discount rates about future payoffs.
Yeah.
There's free riders trying to go break away from the system. It made me think about, is there a good example of a successful climate agreement? And the thing that came to me was the chlorofluorocarbon.
Right.
Where you had a hole in the ozone, there was a danger, but it was abstract. It was distant, and yet people somehow did seem to come together and make a difference and change things. I was wondering, do you agree that was a change, and do you think of why that worked and not others?
Well, yeah. So the question is about CFCs and the Montreal Protocol and kind of refrigerants that were eating away at the ozone layer. and how we actually managed to stop that. I think it was, to keep this answer pretty short, it was just a much, much easier problem. So our entire economy basically runs on fossil fuels now, and the industry is making over $1 trillion a year, and they've become incredibly sophisticated at how they kind of misinform the public and how their lobbyists, here's the thing, like, again, they're literally making over $1 trillion a year. Chuck Schumer worked with Joe Manchin to approve the Mountain Valley Pipeline, and I think that's going to be this year. I think that's going to be a central focus of the movement. So I'm planning to do some stuff down at the Mountain Valley Pipeline. I think going to West Virginia and supporting that is a really good thing to do this year to give a better answer to your or additional answer. You know how much it costs to buy off Chuck Schumer? Less than $300,000. That's like the pennies you find in the back of your couch for the fossil fuel industry. So I was surprised. Like I was like, if you're going to sell the planet, like the Bowie song "Man Who Sold the World," like at least like get more money for it or something. But yeah, so the fossil fuel industry is incredibly powerful, and I've spoken to fossil fuel CEOs. The line they give me, and I think they believe this deeply, and it's what allows them to sleep at night, is that they'll go as fast as we, their customers, allow them to. So they basically are saying, we don't have any responsibility in this mess. But don't forget, for the last 40 years or so, they've been colluding, they've been hiring the best lobbyists and marketers and PR and advertisers on the planet. They've been talking, I'm sure they've been talking to, they know how to convince the public that there's enough uncertainty in the science that we shouldn't take action yet. They know how to wine and dine scientists on the edges who have some credentials and get them to be climate deniers, right? So that if you're a political party that doesn't want to take climate action, there's all this support, there's all this garbage that spreads enough doubt that the people in your political tribe can swallow the lies, right? And keep the oil flowing through the pipelines and keep those sweet profits going into their bank accounts. So I think it's a much harder problem with these CFCs. They're like relatively easy substitutes, like other refrigerants that interestingly are really bad greenhouse gases, but don't deplete the ozone the same way that, and the Freon itself was also a bad greenhouse gas. But they switched to other non-ozone depleting refrigerants relatively easily, and they just, our refrigerators kept working, the air conditioners kept working, so they didn't really have to take a big hit to make it happen. But it did require some organization, it did require some policy, so it still is a good example. It's just, I would say like kind of a 1% of the challenge maybe that we face with fossil fuels. So we should always remember that this climate problem is not impossible. The fossil fuel industry is not invulnerable. We can take them down. There's a lot of legal challenges going on right now. It's kind of both sort of fascinating and deeply boring at the same time. But there's a lot of kids suing governments. There's a lot of lawyers taking on the fossil fuel industry. There's attribution science now, which the fossil fuel industry is terrified of, as well they should be. I think the legal system is a reflection of our broader society. And at some point there's going to be some judge somewhere in some jurisdiction who actually gives a thumbs up to the poor climate activists that are trying to take on the fossil fuel industry and says, yes, the fossil fuel industry has some responsibility. There's this catastrophe. The scientists have attributed at the 99% level that this was caused by burning fossil fuels. This industry has been lying, and there will be some award, right? And the floodgates will open. There will be a precedent. And that's, I think, if I had to predict how the fossil fuel industry finally goes down, I'd say that's probably how it does. So like I've talked about different kinds of activism, but the legal challenge to the fossil fuel industry, I even talked to lawyers. There's lawyers that help me and other climate scientists do like activism and try not to get fired. And I spoke to them, and I'm like, what about like climate scientists, like, just all the crap we have to deal with and the emotional trauma, and they're like, that's probably my case, but yeah, like, bring as many of those lawsuits as possible. Next question, I'll try to go to this side, yes.
It's an earth science question, like, we're already in the positive feedback loops, right? I mean, the
Yeah, I mean,
polar, the ice melting, the
yeah,
permafrost.
we've been in them for a long time. So the positive feedback loops, they can, the rates of feedbacks can change, right? But they're part of the whole thing, right? So, you know, the ice melting in the Arctic, as the Arctic warms, and that allows more sunlight to not reflect off the ice, but to get absorbed by the ocean, so it accelerates. That's been happening ever since the ice started to diminish decades ago. But it continues to happen, and there's other feedbacks too.
So what goes on in my brain is like, if we're already in, if climate change has a life of its own, even if the fossil fuel industry collapsed tomorrow, does the whole trajectory, is it in place?
Most scientists feel that if the fossil fuel industry ended tomorrow, the heating would stop quickly. And it would not be a runaway heating, but we don't know for sure. But most scientists do think that, so like, if we literally stop the fossil fuel industry like that, which again, like a lot of people would die. So I got in a lot of trouble on Twitter one time for doing a thought experiment around that question, which was like understood. Everyone was like, you want like millions of people to die. I'm like, I'm trying to like save all these lives, but if you could do that hypothetically, most scientists I think believe that we would still keep the planet under 1.5 degrees Celsius of global heating. We're roughly at 1.3 right now, depending on how you do the rolling average. But the reason I think that we don't have a snowball's chance in hell of staying under 1.5 degrees is not because the Earth system would go in a runaway feedback. It's because our social and political systems are still going in the wrong direction. So I can't tell you how furious and just full of grief and disappointment I am that the Biden administration has chosen to stand on the side of fossil fuels and not on the side of climate action. Because you can't do both. The main cause, your 80% level, 85% level of this crisis is the fossil fuel industry. So you can't keep giving them subsidies. You can't keep expanding drillings. You can't keep approving their pipelines. You can't keep financing them and then say like, oh, but we've got the Inflation Reduction Act, so we're doing something. Like, you can't have it both ways. The cause is the fossil fuel industry. We have to end it. So yeah, I'm furious at this administration, which has been approving new drilling permits even faster than Trump. Is there anyone who
There's a question over there. I have some questions on Zoom. Too.
Okay, let's take a couple of Zoom ones. I'm trying to get like, people who haven't asked. Yeah. We'll go back there in a bit. Let's take a couple of Zoom.
All right, so they started back a little ways at the beginning of the Q&A. What is the best way to organize one's community around changing our collective mindset and practices?
Oh, God, what a
Kind of
good
that
question.
feeds to what you were just saying.
I don't know yet. Talk to me in a month after I get to meet everyone in Belfast. But yeah, I think it's a hard question. I think a lot of art, I think make the activism fun. It still has to be risky at some level, but it should also be fun. Like the activism, again, it's a very complicated thing. You have to make it inviting to brand new people, but the experienced people have to challenge power, right? So it's a really weird thing if you think about it. But yeah, it's a great question, also a very hard question. Keep trying your best.
I know the answer to this question, but in general, does clearing land to build large-scale factories have a negative impact on climate?
Yeah, so whenever you clear forests away, that's basically, the trees are made out of carbon. So when you clear them away, they basically get burnt and they turn into carbon dioxide. So that's part of why the industrial animal agriculture comes out at 15% of the problem. That includes the deforestation, which is especially down in the Amazon, which is contributing to the tipping point of the Amazon. But yeah, like it's common sense. Like if we all agree we were in a crisis, we would be like, oh yeah, like let's end animal agriculture, because then we could feed more people with less land, like take pressure off of biodiversity with all the methane from the cows burping. It's just like a win-win-win, and people will be healthier. Like, it's like such a no-brainer to end industrial animal agriculture, but it's such a cultural, you know, like people on the far right, like who would hear me say that would take that and create a bigger divide, right? They'd be like, oh, like this freaking liberal is gonna take away your steaks, right? And it's that's the thing though, it's like, what would you rather have, like being alive or eating steaks, right? So yeah, like I think we have to find a way to think, think differently about this whole thing and realize that this planet that seems like a world to us is actually a spaceship. We do have to somehow, like you asked about the climate deniers, like it is incredibly holding back progress. The fact that, you know, even maybe 10% of Americans are in hard denial. And then there's maybe 40% of Americans, mostly Republicans, who are in this like fuzzy kind of like, you know, not thinking this is a real thing, not wanting to do anything about it. Even if they're not saying it's a Chinese hoax, they're still, you know, and then there's even Democrats that, like I was talking about earlier, who were in their own kind of denial, where they think, you know, we can just electrify everything and have more EVs and everything will be fine. So we have to really kind of, I don't know what it's going to take to get into emergency mode. I think it's probably going to take, I think it's probably not a question of if, but when we're going to have the first million death heat wave. So I think it's going to be, and the thing that really frightens me about extreme heat is that it doesn't stop there, right? Like it just keeps, more fossil fuels means more heat. So you get the first heat wave. We saw a heat wave, right, in 2003, where like almost 100,000 people died in Europe. So we're, you know, 10% of the way there. But things are getting so hot now. I mean, I'd be surprised if it happened this summer, but I wouldn't be that surprised. Summer's still young. But then once you get that event, then you get even worse heat waves later. So once you start getting that, then I think people, no matter how much the like calming down scientists say stay calm, people will rightfully freak out. And then we'll be able to switch into emergency mode. And you'll know we're in emergency mode when we start to ramp down commercial aviation, right? Because that's a pure luxury. As much as we think we need to fly, maybe it's something that's a nice to have on planet Earth. And as long as you have private jets, for example, you know, you can be 100% sure we're not in climate emergency. So can we take a question from the back now?
Not quite a question, but sort of a comment that John Kerry goes over to China to talk about China bringing down methane and carbon dioxide. And I'm just wondering, in the administration, and I hear you not happy with the Biden administration, and I'm very much in that same camp of being terribly upset by it all. But do you see any kind of behind the scenes situation going on in the Biden administration to change this trajectory of more fossil fuel permits, et cetera?
That's a great question. I just don't have a seat at the table,
Yeah.
so I can't really answer that. But you know, I know that a lot of the people on this team are really, really smart people. So there must be people on the team that are doing what they can to change that. I don't know what the dynamic is there. I mean, I know President Biden, he has really deep ties with the fossil fuel industry, and I was concerned about that during the campaign. A lot of the people on the campaign team came from the fossil fuel industry. He's had family members work for Ukrainian natural gas companies. So I don't know what other ties they have, but there's a lot of ties there. So I don't know whether President Biden himself is just like, then there's a lot of pressure about like gas prices, right, and inflation, and they don't want to lose the next election. So I wish I knew whether President Biden himself was terrified about global heating, like the way I am. Because I got to talk to Bernie Sanders, and I know he was, unless he's such a good actor that he convinced me, but I have like a real radar for knowing when somebody is genuinely concerned versus when they're, you know, there's not a lot of people who try to pretend to be worried about climate change when they're not, but Bernie was truly, he truly got it. I suspect Biden does not, because a lot of people don't, right? So in a way, like to have a president who like really understood what the stakes were would be like a bit of luck, right? Since I see like a lot of people probably still don't know what the stakes are. So yeah, it's a good question. I would love to see a real pivot from the Biden administration. I really think he should declare emergency immediately. He's got the cover right now of all of these catastrophic events that from the last few weeks. So it would, you know, be very natural for him to do it right now. I'm working on an op-ed to that effect right now.
We support that effort.
Yeah, I know a lot of people have been thinking that the same thing, and I think that declaring a climate emergency would do so many things. I mean, the weird thing is he could take 90% of the actions he needs to take without declaring a climate emergency, just through executive powers. But declaring a climate emergency would also send a huge signal to the climate movement itself. It would send a signal to the media. It would make it harder for universities to not divest. It would send a signal to institutions everywhere. It would send a signal to the fossil fuel industry itself, right? So symbolically speaking, it would be huge. Yes, I don't think you've asked a question yet.
I have not.
Good. I'm trying to be equitable.
Thank you. I guess on that point, I feel like one strategy that Biden might be taking is to work towards equity in terms of representation before declaring an emergency, so that when that emergency is declared, the corrupt things that are happening don't corrupt that.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Doesn't really make sense to me, but I'm not like that much of a, yeah. But let's talk about it later. Do you want to try again to like get it through my?
Get a question. I guess I was more trying to tap into like, are we, from your vantage, are we focused on tracking power?
The movement is the movement focus on. Not really. Yeah, I think so. I think the movement until quite recently was way too polite. So this is something I do have strong kind of feelings about. I don't think petitions worked. I don't think climate marches worked. I think they made people feel good. They made me feel good when I did them. And so that's why I like the climate disobedience a lot. I don't know how much it challenges power, but I do see the climate disobedience as a really good communications technology, because it's like you're taking a risk, which is, it's like putting the chips on the table, right? And you're not just talking, you're really going all in and saying like, yes, this is what I believe, this is serious, right? And then people get that in a way that if you don't put any chips on the table, they just are like, all right, I got a million things to worry about this week. The scientist seems fine. I'll worry about that later. And then, yeah, I really like what climate defiance is doing, because they're literally challenging power directly by like disrupting talks, and it's very personal. And those little videos tend to go kind of viral because, again, it's such a social thing to see this like big, powerful, person up there being challenged by these scrappy activists, and they don't have a good response for it, and they like have awkwardly walk off the stage or something, and it's like, you're kind of cheering it, right? Because it's having an effect. So, but yeah, I think we have to challenge the power much more than we have been. I think the movement is constantly moving. Like I always think that that's why we call it a movement. I don't think we're going to go, back to petitions and politely calling congressional representatives. I think we're going to see more direct action and probably even more disruptive stuff after that, as young people mainly start to, in my opinion, justifiably fear for their lives. So when you're really fearing for your life, then you're not going to be as polite, right? So, yeah.
I'm curious if you read fiction and if there's any authors right now that are
Yeah,
inspiring new worlds or like Kim Stanley Robinson.
yeah. Yeah, read Octavia Butler, she's traveling. Read Kim Stanley Robinson, the first chapter of Ministry for the Future, like, kind of inspired me to start studying extreme heat, because it was just so well done. I'm working on a book about extreme heat too. I feel like by the time I get mine done, there'll already be like 100, so it won't matter, but, I like, who's the guy that wrote, Overstory and,
Richard
Richard
Powers.
Powers, yeah. So that first chapter of Overstory blew me away because I'm like in love with trees. And I thought, so the first chapter of Overstory is about an American chestnut tree. And it's kind of written from the vantage point of this one tree as like the humans around it kind of come and go. And it was, to me, just an absolute tour de force. I was riveted, and I thought the whole rest of the novel was going to be like that. And it was a little bit more normal, but those are some suggestions for fiction. So there is some good climate fiction out there, but it's not enough yet, I think. The Great Transition, yeah, that's
No, this is actually, my son asked me to give it to you.
okay.
It's Simon Schuster picked it up. My son wrote it, and it's a novel, and it's described as a hopeful climate crisis novel.
Excellent.
And he signed it, and this is the first real copy.
All right. Your summer reading.
Yeah, I look forward to that. Because I sometimes I think like I should try writing a climate fiction book. I like that'll ever happen.
I just
Okay.
have to add to that one, is Hadestown is
Yeah.
a Broadway musical that is incredible. Archetypal take on climate change.
I
And
also-
the musical concept.
What's it called?
Hadestown.
Hadestown.
Orpheus and Eurydice.
Oh, okay.
That in a kind of modern, but also classical climate.
Do you have to go to New York City to see it, or is it?
You can listen to the recording, it has the complete story is on the recording. There's no, there's nothing edited out.
And then a film that I truly loved, and I actually wrote a Guardian op-ed about it. And some people don't like it, but is Adam's film Don't Look Up,
I love that.
which I just recently rewatched, and it really stood up. Yeah, Don't Look Up. It really encapsulates how I feel in a very real way. So it's I know, like, maybe if you're not a climate scientist, you're like, oh, come on, like things aren't that bad or something, but it's exactly how I feel all the time. Like in that movie.
All right, we should probably just take one more question, and I think Meredith has a question.
Okay,
Oh.
Meredith, last question.
Yeah, just, war. We have to talk about the fact that we have over 800 military bases surrounding, and that every administration is looking at US hegemony, and that the US military is the biggest carbon provider.
Back around.
So, I mean, we need to come together with around peace as well as, it's all the
Yeah,
same.
I mean,
survival.
so I have to write a chapter for a book, I guess, like climate science for astronomers, and I feel really guilty that I haven't finished yet, but there's this idea that possibly why we haven't seen alien life yet out there is because they all have the same problem, and they don't succeed getting past this bottleneck of global heating because of burning fossil fuels. And I'm not sure I agree with that, because I think that's a little bit of a human arrogant, kind of like a little arrogant or human centric. I think there's probably other species out there that are a little smarter than us, but I do feel like this is our big test, and we do have to come together with love. And yeah, so ending wars, I mean, that's what makes me so afraid though too, is that it's hard to imagine coming out of this without basically learning how to put others before self. It's hard to imagine coming out of this without policies that deeply protect the working class during the transition and the most vulnerable people, for example. Because if you don't do that, it's ethically the right thing to do, but it's also practically necessary because otherwise your policy, whatever it is going to be deeply unpopular and they'll just vote in the fascists for the next election, right? So you absolutely need to, somehow we have to learn that billionaires suck and we have to kind of take back that power and we have to put others before self. And that it's not clear that we are learning that lesson quickly enough. But to end on a hopeful note, again, and to tie back to the military thing, man, we can do so much better than 6% of the US military budget to save Spaceship Earth. Like, what if we prioritize having a habitable planet to the level of 20% of what we spend on killing other humans, or 50%? Or what if we thought it was even more important than the war machine, right? Having a habitable planet. So that is where humanity has to go. It's gonna go in fits and starts, and there's gonna be a lot of bad heat waves that kill a lot of people, and we're gonna lose coastal cities, and it's gonna be a mess. But that's where we have to go as a species. And my biggest dream and hope is that sometime before I die, I see humanity going in the right direction. So maybe that's a good place to end.
Yeah.
Thanks so much to Peter for coming out. Give him another round of applause. Thanks for Waldo County Chief of Justice and Brenda in the library and all of you being here tonight. At the end of the back of the table, do you want to talk about the table real quick, Ridgely?
Well, there's information about, I think
About-
there's some people here, there's certainly information about how to get involved.
Yes, that's one group to get involved with. Also, if you want to come to the gatherings of the Possibility Alliance, you get connected to a lot of wonderful groups working around the state and the nation. And real quick,
There's also a sign up, if you just want emails from the Peace and Justice Group about what we're doing each month. There's just an email list you can put stuff on.
Peter's available here for a month too, and is excited to have conversations about this. So please reach out to Peter. He'll be back by his books.
Yeah, and if you want a book again, they're at cost, it's $11. And if you really want one, you can't afford that, just talk to me and work something out. But happy to sign them, for you to take them.
So real quick, I'm inviting everyone to turn to somebody just for a minute and take